Well, welcome to a new Team CGC 9.8 video, and on today's video I wanted to talk about Batman comics from the 1980s in the CGC 9.8, because if you're like me and you really like CGC 9.8 comics from the 1980s, I think Batman comics provide a pretty unique kind of value proposition, and the best way I could explain it is, I think Batman and Spider-Man are both equal on the sort of iconic superhero meter. I would say that they're both completely iconic superheroes, ingrained in our culture, really popular. But when you look at the equivalent comics from the 1980s, I find that Batman comics in general have a lot less issues in the CGC 9.8 than the equivalent Spider-Man comic. And then when you look at the price, a lot of times Batman prices, if you're really patient on the price, you get a good price on these comics. A lot of times they're about 20 to 30% less than the equivalent Amazing Spider-Man key issue. So, right off the bat, this is almost one of the things that really got me interested in buying CGC 9.8 comics, was the sort of low print run 1980s Batman comics, because Batman comics were low printed from Batman 357 to Batman 402, I believe it is. All those comics were highly underprinted compared to the equivalent Amazing Spider-Man. And I have a lot of those comics. We'll look on the CGC census, and we'll discover just how limited they are compared to Amazing Spider-Man comics. So let's get into some of my recommendations here. I want to show you first this one because it's so limited and it's a really good example of what I'm talking about. So Batman 358. This one is essentially the second appearance of Killer Croc. First Killer Croc cover, but his face is hidden. But Batman 358, this one's not really a key issue, I would say. But what this book what I would call this book is sort of a CGC key issue. And looking on the census, you'll discover why, because on the census there are only 21 of these in the CGC 9.8 in the entire world. So this book here is a 1 of 21 item. And another thing about first appearance of Killer Croc, there's quite a bit of a debate going on about, because apparently in Batman 357 he's only on a few pages, so a lot of people say that is still sort of his cameo in a sense, and this issue is his first full appearance, even though officially his cameo is in Detective 523, and then his first full appearance is Batman 357, and then you got Batman 358 here. So again, Killer Croc's first appearance is somewhat debated, but this issue here is really just you get a low print Batman comic from that Batman run, and when you look on the CGC census, for it kind of being a secondary key, there's just not a lot of issues at all. 1 of 21, obviously. Looking at the CGC 9.8 ratio, 16.2% of all graded Batman 358s are 9.8s. And that's pretty low. It's not super low. It's not like Amazing Spider-Man 300 low, which is like 6%. But, for not very many Batman comics being out there. And, I've discussed this on other videos where, Batman and Spider-Man collectors are, I feel a little bit different, whereas Spider-Man collectors maybe a little bit more of a bandwagon type collector, where they won't hold on for the books very much. They'll get into comics, they'll buy a lot of these comics, hold on to them for about a year or two, and then sell them and send them away. And because that happens with Spider-Man comics, the CGC 9.8 ratios are lower because they're handled a lot more, they're in worse shape in general on a relative basis, even though there's way, way more of them printed. Whereas Batman collectors, I think, from the beginning took care of their books better. If you buy Batman books and you really like Batman, you'll probably hold on to them for 10 years, 15 years, rather than just a couple years if you're kind of a bandwagon Spider-Man collector. So that's sort of my thinking on how, I don't even know if that's correct, that's just sort of my theory. But Batman 358 is, I think, in the CGC 9.8, if you're really patient, you can find a really good deal on this book. I think it's a really good buy. And yeah, this book, I paid, I believe it was about $300 US, and this one's in the old case as well. And yeah, if you can, even now, I've seen this issue pop up periodically on eBay, and in general the buy it nows have been over $500. You know, it's just becoming one of those CGC key issues. You know, a good comparison might be Amazing Spider-Man 301, where, you know, it's the next issue after First Venom. It's not really a key issue in any way, like no first appearance, no anything like that. But it's so rare on the CGC census that now an Amazing Spider-Man 301 CGC 9.8 is about $1,200 about. So I think this comic is very similar in that, where, you know, there's not an iconic first appearance or anything, but it's just so rare on the CGC census. It's the issue right after the first Killer Croc issue, so it's kind of overlooked and underfollowed and kind of underappreciated. Until, I would say, in the last couple years here, where people are realizing that, hey, on the CGC census there's only 21 of these, and that's super, super rare. So, yeah, Batman 358, you know, you'd have to, if you're gonna purchase one, you'd have to be really patient, probably. Unless you do want to pay up for it, you know, you could pay, I believe it's like $450 to $550. Some of these buy it nows every now and then I see popping up on eBay. And I think those are usually in a new case. So, you know, this issue, it might be one of those ones worth paying up for, being that there's only 21 in the world. Could be one worth paying up for, but, you know, totally up to you. Depends if you really love Batman. You know, if you don't really love Batman, I wouldn't really recommend to buy like secondary keys. They're probably a little bit harder to sell on the way out, even though they might be super rare or whatever it might be. Okay, next issue I want to recommend is Batman 366. And yeah, Batman 366, I think, you know, this is one of, I'm kind of on the record, this is one of my favorite Batman comics ever. And, you know, I got one in the CGC 9.8. This is first Jason Todd in Robin costume, so kind of a secondary key, I would say. If you notice on this one, this is the newsstand version. I also have a direct version, and I think I'll show you that because I actually brought out my whole box of kind of my Batman CGC box. And we'll go over some of the keys really quick after I get into, you know, some of the CGC analysis here. But Batman 366, I think, is a great issue. It's a, you know, secondary key issue. It's a lot more affordable than Batman 357, but I think has a cooler cover, and you know, still has Jason Todd as his first time in the Robin costume. Looking on the CGC census, there are only 141 of these in the CGC 9.8. Again, you know, the first issue we looked at was 21. This one's 141 for a secondary key. Amazing Spider-Man books, for a secondary key, Amazing Spider-Man books from '83, you know, 141 of these. In Spider-Man, you're looking at, you know, 400 to 500 as far as numbers of CGC 9.8s. So again, kind of going back to my original point, Batman comics just as cool, but less numbers than the equivalent Spider-Man comic. CGC 9.8 ratio on this one's a little bit high, 30.5%. And, you know, I think right from the bat, people just really loved this issue and kept it in amazing condition, even though there wasn't a lot printed. So that's going to explain that 30.5% CGC ratio. That is very high. You know, usually for 1983 books, you know, around 15 or below is kind of where you want to see it. You know, much more relatively rare. But yeah, with this book, a little bit of a one-off. I think just right from the beginning it was a key issue, and a lot of collectors kept it in really good shape. But still, 141 CGC 9.8, so 1 of 141 is pretty cool. And yeah, I totally recommend a Batman 366. Probably a little bit easier to find than a Batman 358. As far as price too for Batman 366, my newsstand version I paid up a bit for. I believe it was maybe $2.99. It might have even been a little bit more. But you know, for 366, a non-newsstand version in an auction, which is how I bought my other comic, I actually only paid, it was like $205 Canadian for Batman 366 in an old case direct version. It was like $205 Canadian, so that's, you know, $170, $175 American. I thought that was a great deal when I got it, and I think that still is a really good deal. I'll show you that one later. But Batman 366, you know, one of my favorite kind of secondary issues that's still even somewhat underfollowed, and only 141 on the CGC census in the 9.8. So next book is, you know, probably the most popular Batman key issue from the 1980s, and it's Batman: The Dark Knight Returns #1, CGC 9.8. And, you know, looking on the census for this book, There are 523 CGC 9.8s in Batman The Dark Knight Returns #1. And, you know, this being pretty much the most popular Batman book from the 1980s, I would say it's this and maybe Batman 357 is the other one, which is a book I don't have, unfortunately. But, yeah, very popular, this book. This is kind of somewhat known as, like, the first new modern Batman. Another thing about this book is, you know, Frank Miller really did some innovative techniques with the story, and this kind of ushered in almost a whole new generation of writing comics and sort of blending the art and writing together in a different way. This is one of the top 10 graphic novels of all time, and yeah, Todd McFarlane's on record as saying, you know, this issue specifically kind of changed the way he thought about writing comics and things like that. So, and if you look at the classic definition of a Bronze Age comic, it goes from 1970 to 1986. And this book being a 1986 book, this is pretty much responsible for the sort of ushering of the Copper Age, modern age of comic books. You know, that classic definition of Bronze Age goes up to 1986, and it's really because this book was made in 1986. Yeah, again, a lot of innovative techniques with the writing and the art. Frank Miller story, and he did the cover too with Klaus Janson. Kind of a possible catalyst for this issue too is first appearance of Carrie Kelly, who's the girl Robin, and you know how these movie studios are really kind of on that inclusive bandwagon type thing and diversity and all that. I mean, I could see a Carrie Kelly Robin movie coming out in the next 10 years, like almost 100%. So that's a little bit of a catalyst for this one. Looking on the census, there's 523 CGC 9.8s in this book, and this is going to be pretty much the most copies in a Batman 1980s book for a key issue that you're going to see. So 523 of these in the CGC 9.8. That doesn't include Killing Joke, actually. Yeah, Killing Joke, there's way more. That's kind of a one-off as far as Batman books. But, you know, this book can almost be pretty much directly compared to an Amazing Spider-Man 300, in my opinion. And Amazing Spider-Man 300, there's about 950 of them. And this one, there's about 523. There's 523 in the CGC 9.8. So, again, equivalent to an Amazing Spider-Man 300, but a lot less 9.8s on the census, you know, which was my original point. And that's why I really love Batman books. And, you know, this book's a bit of a hit or miss because the cover's quite bland, gotta admit. But over time, it's just become, the book has such a big reputation among writers and artists that, you know, I think the kind of bland cover has sort of taken a back seat. And, you know, because it's so simple with the Thunderbolt and everything, the Lightning Bolt, that in itself has become somewhat iconic as well. So I think, like, the simpleness of this cover actually has helped out the issue over time. But, you know, if you're really serious, you really like Batman, I think Batman The Dark Knight Returns #1 is probably the one Batman comic in the 1980s that you would want to buy. You know, if you were thinking about it from an investment perspective. And, you know, price-wise for Batman Dark Knight Returns, you know, you see him from like about $800 to $900 dollars in a sort of buy it now type price. And that's sort of, yeah, that's sort of Canadian actually. You know, you're probably looking anywhere from like $850 to about 1,100 Canadian. So, you know, that's going to put you kind of in that $650 to $750, $800 range American. So quite expensive for this book, but again, top 10 graphic novel of all time. Ushered in the modern age of comic books, essentially. So, yeah, as an investment grade book, I think, you know, this is one to get. If you're a Batman fan, this is definitely one of the ones to get for sure. And if, you know, maybe you weren't the biggest Batman fan, but you still wanted to have a Batman book, and like maybe you can only choose one and you wanted it to be like the best key possible, then Batman Dark Knight Returns should definitely be, you know, on your short list, I would say. Okay, last book here that I want to kind of go over on the CGC census is Batman 423. I also brought out my box, so I'm going to go over sort of some other lesser key issues in the CGC 9.8, but we just won't go over kind of the details. I'll just show you them, the ones that I have. So Batman 423, I have two of these in the CGC 9.8. there are only 84 of these on the CGC census. So I have 2 of 84, which is a great feeling. This is the classic Todd McFarlane Batman cover. You know, pretty much the only, he did a couple other Batman covers. He did a detective cover, that was his first cover, but it was with Pablo Marcos. Not a very appealing, eye-catching cover. So this one has sort of become like the Todd McFarlane Batman cover that everyone wants. And, you know, he did a Spawn Batman crossover McFarlane, where he drew Batman too. But essentially, like in the 80s, there's only 2 Todd McFarlane Batman covers. This one's the best one by far. I do have the other detective one. I think it's in this box. I could show you that one too. But, you know, this book, yeah, really, it's kind of becoming sort of a CGC key. And also, I think, you know, in the same way how Incredible Hulk 340 has really skyrocketed, you know, just the Todd McFarlane cult of fans are really kind of catching on to this book, I think. So, and it is one that, you know, if you didn't kind of grow up with Todd McFarlane, it's one of those Todd McFarlane issues that's really easy to just not even know that he did in some ways. But then when you find it and you see how cool it is, and I've kind of on the record as saying how many Spawn elements are in this cover too, just with kind of the cape having a mind of its own, and his eyes all squinted out like Spawn's. And yeah, so for me, I kind of made another video where this is kind of the unofficial Spawn #1 for me, especially because Spawn #1 has so many printed copies in the CGC 9.8, so it's not rare at all. So this is a lot more rare, and it got a lot of Spawn elements in it. So to me, this is almost like Spawn #1 in a sense, even though it's not clearly, like, it's not the first appearance of Spawn. But so many cool reasons to want a Batman 423, and probably the biggest is that on the CGC census there's only 84. So if you bought one in the 9.8, you're getting a 1 of 84 item, and you know, as a collector and investor, that's what you want essentially. Okay, so Batman 423, couldn't recommend it enough. As far as prices too with 423, about 2-3 weeks ago I saw an auction go for about $340 on a Batman CGC 9.8 Batman 423. And that's less than what I paid for mine. Yeah, Batman 423 for me was an issue I just wanted right off the bat, and there wasn't too many, and that was kind of, you know, when I was just starting out. So I ended up paying up a little bit for these, in that sort of the $450-ish American range. So probably about $100 I paid up too much for both of my Batman 423s, but I just wanted them right away, so I was willing to kind of pay the extra 50 or 100, and I was a little bit less experienced back then, so a little bit not as knowledgeable about how the comic book market worked. Okay, so I got my box out here, Batman comics, that I want to kind of just quickly show you and run through some of the books I have. Before that, I want to mention the 2 that I don't own, that I won't show you because I don't own, but I think they're really good investments, is Batman 357, the first Killer Croc we kind of talked about a bit. That one's a great book to have. Every now and then I see one pop up for kind of $550 to $600 American. First Killer Croc, first book in that low print run of Batman. Honestly, it's a really great issue, really looks really good on the CGC census too. You get an iconic first appearance. The only reason I don't have it is I don't like the cover. The cover is just, it's all that green color, and it's really hard to even tell what's going on. Killer Croc's not on the cover. So for me, I just don't like that cover very much. Personally, I would, if you're you really want that type of book, I would get into Detective 523, actually, before Batman 357. Personally, that cover I think is way cooler, and it's the first cameo of Killer Croc, so it's not his first full appearance, but I just think a cooler cover. And yeah, Batman 357s, I don't see them sell very well. You know, on an auction, certainly they would sell, but I just never see auctions for them either. They're always just buy it nows for $550, $600, and rarely do they sell. So, you know, maybe a Batman 357, if an auction comes up, I take a stab at that. Also, the other one I don't have, Batman 386, first Black Mask. That's one I've on the record on these videos saying that I want. So kind of keeping my eye out for that, possibly a Batman 386 in the CGC 9.8. Okay, let's just get into some other Batmans here from the 80s. I'm just going to show you them really quick. Killing Joke, great one. There's a ton of these in the CGC 9.8, so it's not really an investment grade book, I would say, but if you really love Batman and you're kind of on a budget, this is kind of the book to get. It's quite easy to find for, you know, 150 to 180 bucks, I would say, in that range. Quite a lot of them go for that. I'll show you this one. It's a 90s book, but this is one I had purchased. A Batman 450, just with a cool Joker cover. And this has a brief origin of Joker, it says up here. So this could actually do quite well when the Joker movie comes out in October. And I'm not going to sell it or anything, but you know, I'll kind of probably be looking at the prices just to see how this issue does. Because this is not a key issue. It's like in the Overstreet price guide, it's worth like $4. But I love Joker covers, so I have a couple of these in the raw copies too that I just saw in, you know, a couple comic book stores for $4 and picked them up. But yeah, you get a brief origin of Joker, pretty easy to find. A Batman 450 in the CGC 9.8 too. Paid about yeah, it was like 80, 90 bucks for this one too. So yeah, you can be patient. You don't have to kind of pay up for these. This one's really cool. Batman 423 or 428. Sorry, could have easily brought this up here. This is a pretty hard book to find, especially in a new case. You don't see these at all, hardly. This is a Death of Jason Todd. So with a Death in the Family series, this is the key issue of that 4-part series, 4-book series. This is the main key. Really hard to find. This one I bought on an auction on eBay. And it ended up being a little bit over $400 US. And yeah, that auction really, it was one where I really wanted this book because I'd been kind of looking for it because it's a key issue from this era, and it just wasn't not popping up for like months and months and months and months on eBay. So when an auction did pop up, I kind of overbid right at the end and was hoping that, you know, somebody else didn't bid really high as well, just to make sure I won it kind of thing. But that ended up happening, you know, it was a little bit over $400. I think it was like $410, $420 or something like that. Which I would say is a little bit of an overpay. I've seen one since in an old case go for about $2.99 American. So this one I paid a little over $400 on an auction though. So it was, you know, it's kind of hard on an auction sometimes. You know, you put in a high bid just to make sure you win it, but then other times, you know, some people are actually bidding that high too as well. So that's what kind of happened on that. But still so happy to have it in a new case. It's really rare, really hard to find. My other Batman 423. This one's a pretty cool one too. A Batman 408. This is a origin of Jason Todd. And it also has the Lamborghini Countach on the cover, which I think is kind of cool. Kind of a, you know, an 80s car fan, I guess, supercar fan. Also, you get a Joker appearance on this issue. Yeah, this is one I picked up on an auction. It was kind of an opportunistic buy. It ended up being like maybe 120 bucks or something like that. Batman 404. This is one I certainly recommend. You know, if you're on a budget, this is the Batman book I would recommend over Killing Joke. Like I said, Killing Joke, if you're on a budget, I'd recommend that. Batman 404, Year 1, Part 1, first modern Catwoman, retells the origin of Batman, and that's, you know, for me, that's the main reason I love Batman, is his origin. You know, he's got issues. His parents were killed, and he's dealing with that, and he dresses up like a bat and fights crime. Like, he's definitely got issues, so this kind of retells his origin, and you get a really cool cover. And yeah, price on this is, if you're on an auction kind of thing, you can get it for kind of $120 to $140. And then to buy it now, you're kind of looking, you know, $175, $180, maybe even up to $200. But yeah, if you're on a budget, I'd recommend 404 over Killing Joke. Batman 368. This is first Robin. Jason Todd officially becomes Robin in this one. Whereas in 366, he puts on the Robin costume for the first time. But in this one, he officially becomes Robin. 368. This is another one that, if you're patient, you can find for a really good deal. I ended up paying for this. It was like $169.99 Canadian, I believe. So yeah, pretty good price for this. Under 150 American, I would say. And yeah, kind of a cool secondary issue. My other Batman 366. This is the direct version. It's got some letters here, whereas the other one has that the UPC barcode is the newsstand version, a little bit more rare. But yeah, this is where Jason Todd first puts on the Robin costume, plus a really cool Walt Simonson cover with like Joker with the dually wieldy handguns, which is what I always liked about it. Okay, now, so that's my Batman one because I don't have a 357. So, you know, first Killer Croc 357, that's a big key out of that, so don't have that one. Next one, Detective Comics 583. This is one I just unboxed maybe 2 weeks ago. This is a pristine copy, super, you know, perfectly centered, great vibrant colors. You know, almost a 9.9 candidate to be honest. It looks so good. Yeah, 1980s, but a 1988 book, first appearance of the ventriloquist in Scarface. So that's that Batman villain where he holds the little Scarface dummy with like the little gangster Scarface dummy. So cool. If check out Batman animated series from the early 90s, he's on it. Yeah, and this issue's done really well since apparently the Scarface and ventriloquist was on the Gotham TV series, which I hadn't seen, but apparently the actor did a really good job and it was really cool, and this issue after that kind of blew up a bit. So I paid $250 American for this, and yeah, there's only 80 something I believe on the CGC census too. So yeah, just a really cool rare kind of Batman book. Again, a good example of, you know, those secondary Batman issues where there's not a lot of them in the CGC 9.8, whereas a secondary Amazing Spider-Man book, there's like 400 or 500. A Detective 523, and I think I showed this on, yeah, one of my like underappreciated videos, I believe it was. And yeah, this is just my favorite Killer Croc cover by far. Yeah, not really any like, you know, iconic first appearance in this issue or anything. You know, 523, which I will show you here, is kind of the key issue from this era in the Detective Comics. That's first Killer Croc cameo and the really cool like Solomon Grundy cover. But 525, if you kind of love this era, this is kind of the one I would recommend if you're on a budget. It's usually, you know, anywhere from 150 to 200 American. And yeah, for, you know, a 1983 book for 200 American, cool, awesome, cool Batman cover. Like, I just think this is a great book. Just a great cover. It's kind of reminds me of like a, you know, an equivalent to like an Amazing Spider-Man 316, where that's like the first Venom cover and it's just a really cool Venom cover, but not really a key issue. Well, this is like the first really cool Killer Croc cover. Even though it's not really a key issue, it's still, you know, totally worth a tab. And I'm pretty sure there's maybe less than 100 on the CGC census on these. Maybe just over 100, but there's not a lot at all on the CGC census of this book. And this book too was one that I had graded myself. I bought a near mint copy online that looked perfect, and yeah, it was a CGC 9.8 when I sent it away, so that was great. Here's the other book that I bought online that looked perfect. Came back a CGC 9.6, but that's okay. And yeah, this is the one I would recommend, you know, out of this sort of era of Detective Comics. Detective 523, really cool Solomon Grundy cover, first cameo appearance of Killer Croc. And yeah, this one I really wished it came back in a 9.8 because it did look really good. Yeah, probably just the bottom left corner a little fluff. That's probably the 9.6. It's basically perfect though. Besides that, unfortunately not a 9.8. So and yeah, I seen a 9.8 of this one, Detective 523, sell for $269.99 a couple weeks ago too. And I thought that was a really good deal. If you can get that in a 9.8 for like $260, I'd probably buy it. This is that other Todd McFarlane Batman cover I was telling you about. Detective 576, Year 2, Part 2. McFarlane and Pablo Marcos kind of teamed up to do this cover. And yeah, you know, not the most eye-catching cover, I would say. So, you know, as I said, Batman 423 has kind of become the McFarlane Batman cover to want. But if you're on a budget, this one for me, I believe it was like 120 bucks in an auction. So yeah, be patient with that one. You find it in an auction for, yeah, just over 100. Okay, yeah, and I'll show you this last one, even though it's not an 80s book. Yeah, My Vengeance of Bane. First Bane. Yeah, this is what, 1993 book. But if you want a first appearance of a Batman villain, and yeah, you don't kind of want to break the bank, this one cost me $230. First appearance of Bane. Yeah, it's a really cool book. for early 90s, books were so printed during that time. So I believe there's about 700 of these. So yeah, once you get into those early 90s, and anything in the early 90s, there's quite a few copies. But an iconic first appearance and origin of Bane. So you almost can't go wrong. Okay, that's going to be it pretty much for my 80s Batman comics. Yeah, I got my Batman Beyonds, but those are 90s. So yeah, again, my original point was I think Batman comics from the 1980s are, just as iconic as Spider-Man comics. Just as iconic as far as superheroes and as far as the covers and how cool they are and first appearances. But a lot of times there's way less copies in the CGC 9.8, and in general probably about 20 to 30% less in price as well, if you're patient. Because, because there's less copies, a little bit harder to find, got to be more patient. But if you are patient with these Batman comics, you can get some really good deals. And again, when you compare them to Spider-Man comics, I just think they're such a good value proposition. Because, Spider-Man comics, I totally recommend to buy those too. I'm comparing them to Spider-Man as, I would say Spider-Man's sort of at the top of the mountain kind of thing in the comic book world, where you wouldn't want to fight its popularity because Spider-Man's so popular. And I love Spider-Man too, so I want the books regardless of if it was or wasn't popular. So I'd always recommend to grab Spider-Man books, but Spider-Man for me is kind of more of like a growthy, overpriced area of the market, whereas Batman books would be sort of a value type of part of the market. Again, because a little bit less money and a little bit less copies in the CGC 9.8. So yeah, 1980s Batman comics, investment grade books, I think in the CGC 9.8, still somewhat affordable, and I think this is a great area to invest in comic books, especially if you like me and you like those 1980s CGC 9.8 books. Okay, that'll be all for today's video though. Glad I could bring all my Batman comics out. This is, I think, the first time I had brought my box out and kind of just took comics out of a box and showed you guys, so that's something new. But thank you very much for watching today. If you haven't already, please join the team and subscribe to Team CGC here. And thank you so much for watching though, and I will see you on the next video.